quick introduction. Voila. There's the recording. Fantastic. So I guess today, just the third of the Capital Hub and Net Zero City workshops on different financial products that cities can think about when thinking about how they finance their investment plans. We've done one on city funds and SPVs, and also one on issuing green bonds. And so today's discussion moves in a slightly different direction in terms of carbon credits, and very happy to hand over to my colleagues at South Pole, who are key consortium partners for the Capital Hub and the Net Zero City platform, and they're going to run us through what we need to know in terms of carbon credits and the carbon markets as a whole, to be honest, in order to think about where they come into play in terms of financing. So without further ado, Mara, let me hand over to you and we can take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison, and hello, everyone. Very good to see you all here, and we hope that some more will join who might still be stuck on the old link, but we will start nonetheless. My name is Mara Mentz. I'm a senior specialist at South Pole, and South Pole is one of the Net Zero Cities Consortium members. We're involved in various work streams of Net Zero Cities, but we are a member of the Cities Missions Capital Hub, meaning once your action and investment plans are approved and have received the mission label from the EU Commission, you will get access to the Cities Mission Capital Hub through your city advisors, who can then support you on means and how to finance your Net Zero Cities projects. And this is exactly the scope in which this webinar falls. We will today present you the opportunities and limitations of carbon markets for net zero cities. Before that, just some brief words on South Pole. For those of you who do not know South Pole, we are a company that is headquartered in Switzerland, but we have offices all around the world. And carbon is really one of the core areas of our business. South Pole was founded in 2006 as one of the earliest, and it became one of the biggest players in the voluntary carbon market. Nowadays, the scope of South Pole's activities grew much larger and encompasses support to public and private sector clients across the whole climate journey, thus also our involvement in net zero cities. But still, carbon and carbon markets remain one of the core activities of our business. And I'm therefore very happy today that I'm joined by one of our best and very seasoned experts in the carbon market, which I will introduce in a second after presenting quickly the housekeeping rules. During the presentation, as I have said in the beginning, we would kindly ask you to rename yourself and to include the name of your city next to your name, so we always know from which city that you are joining us. And we kindly ask you to put yourself on mute during the presentation. And if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A part of the chat. So not the main chat, but really into Q&A, please. And we will then make sure to gather your question and will address them during the Q&A session at the end of the session. The idea is to have around 40 minutes presentation and around 20 minutes Q&A. And please feel free to say hello to us or to post any kind of comment. We'll be happy to take that on board. Thank you. Then let's go to the agenda. Next slide, please. So we already started with the welcoming session, and then Eva will give you a short introduction on carbon credits and mostly on carbon credits. Then we will go to some examples at the city level. Oscar will speak to us about mainly compliance mechanism, but also touch a bit on carbon markets in general. And then we have Emeric, who will present to us the city level initiatives from the City Finance Lab. And last but not least, Anne will present us the cooperative carbon, a real life city example of the city of La Rochelle. Now over to our speakers. I'm joined today by 4 speakers. First of them is Eva van der Wand. She is the head of business development at Airfix. Airfix is a South Pole subsidiary, mostly working on carbon removals and market development around carbon removals. And before that, she was working as strategic business development expert and global expert for climate action credits at South Pole. And I think it's safe to say that almost as long as carbon markets exist, Eva is working on them. So she can definitely answer a lot of your questions. Then we have Oscar Rueda. Oscar is a senior managing consultant in our climate policy, finance, and carbon markets team here at South Pole. He is mostly advising clients on carbon removals, compliance markets, and other net zero technologies and regulations. So he is a very seasoned expert on the topic. And then we have Emeric Raymond. He is the head of project development at Airfix, and he is also working in the climate investment team at South Pole. And he already worked quite a lot with cities to develop innovative finance solutions for climate actions in scope of the City Finance Lab, about which he will tell us a bit more in a few minutes. And then last but not least, we have Anne Rostang. She is the Director General of the Corporate Carbon Initiative of La Rochelle, and she will also tell us more about this in a few minutes as well. So these are our speakers, and without further ado, we will start with the first presentation. Please, Eva.
Hello, everyone. Also from my side, my name is Eva van der Wand, and you can dive into the next slide, please, already. So I will just give you a very short introduction, and it's important that I will focus mainly on the voluntary carbon market, as Oscar will then also cover the differences of the voluntary market schemes and compliance schemes, and dive into that topic in the next webinar phase or topic. And first of all, I would like to repeat for those who already know the most important definition of what is actually a carbon credit. This is actually then true for both of the markets, so the voluntary and the compliance market purposes. So a carbon credit is defined as a tradable certificate that can actually result from a so-called climate action project or a carbon project. These terms are used in exchange depending on the region where you are. And it's important that these carbon projects or also climate action projects either refer to avoided, reduced, or removed greenhouse gases. So meaning the CO2 equivalent is referred here. The small e that you sometimes see means that all greenhouse gases are accounted for, not only carbon or CO2. And then what is important to remember is the
very important limitation which should be known. Then, of course, what is also important to know is like the cost and times, meaning carbon certification, especially in Europe, whereas the salary costs are high, is a lengthy, a complicated, and also a cost-intensive process, which also brings about transaction costs. And so for many projects, this eats into the business case. And thirdly, what is very important to mention is that there is a risk for double counting. For one, in between the voluntary and the compliance market, to always make sure that one carbon credit is always only counted once. And then also in case of net zero cities, double counting becomes a whole new meaning, because if you would have a project that would qualify, here we speak about reduction and avoidance projects that would qualify for a voluntary carbon market. Like that means you would basically sell the emissions reductions off, meaning you could no longer claim it to your 80% reductions that you claim for the Net Zero Cities Action Plan. So these are important limitations to consider, but as mentioned, and the good news, there are of course also select opportunities. For one, the case is a bit different for carbon removal projects. Here we would really encourage you, if you are developing a carbon removal project, for example, like a BECS project in your municipality, that you approach the Cities Mission Capital Hub, and we will be happy to support you on a case-by-case feasibility analysis, whether there is possibility to monetize the carbon removal credits. Then, of course, also like the compliance market, there it is certainly important to always be aware about the newest regulations. Currently in the EU, mostly the EU ETS is in operation. The EU ETS 2 is under development, and there are also opportunities how to profit, for example, through the EU Innovation Fund. And then thirdly, there are, of course, also carbon pricing schemes, about which we will talk a little bit more in a second, where, for example, kind of quasi-market schemes such as carbon taxes or the setting of internal carbon prices could help to monetize carbon for your net zero cities projects. Especially about compliance market and carbon pricing schemes, Oscar and Emmerich will tell us a little bit more in a second. Carbon removal project we don't specifically highlight in this presentation, but we really encourage you to approach the CIS Mission Capital Hub if you have a carbon removal project in your municipality, and we take it up bilaterally. This is a short overview, and now I would like to hand over to Oscar, who will start with his presentation.
Thank you so much, Mara, and thank you, Eva, also for this great introduction. Is my audio good so far? Excellent. So yes. I'll take a step back. We can go to the next slide, please, and clarify what are carbon markets, how they work, and how they compare, for instance, to other forms of finance. So very briefly, carbon markets are a form of finance that focus on monetizing impact. Essentially, they put a price on either emission reductions, removals, or also on net emissions, as we will see for the case of compliance. What is very special, as you can imagine, is since they are focused on impact, they have to be applied to technologies or solutions that are commercially available or already in a possibility to have some initial commercial application. If you have, for instance, a research and development solution at a very early stage, then there are other more suitable forms of finance to support it. Next slide, please. There are various types of carbon markets. Mara and Eva already introduced some of them. Compliance markets is essentially markets regulated by an authority, like the EU, for instance, for the case of emission of the EU ETS. There is the voluntary carbon market, which is the case in which companies, for instance, want to voluntarily, without an obligation to do it, want to support some form of climate mitigation. And there is international carbon markets that can be a form of both types of markets. They are not new. However, the new implementation tools that we have at our disposal, Article 6.2 and 6.4 of the Paris Agreement, they essentially enable the transfer of climate mitigation outcomes. The main difference is that Article 6.2, the transfer of outcomes happens bilaterally between two countries, and the new mechanism, Article 6.4, works essentially as a global market regulated by the United Nations. Next slide, please. For the context of cities in the EU, I have to highlight that compliance markets are by far the most important tool. The EU ETS, for instance, already covers a large fraction of the total emissions in the EU, and with upcoming changes, new sectors, for instance, buildings, transportation, are going to be covered as well. So far, the ones that are covered are, for instance, energy and heavy industry, for example. Other tools, such as international markets, may have a very limited role, if anything, because, for instance, the EU has already said that they don't intend to rely on Article 6.2, for instance. Voluntary markets can have a limited area of opportunity, as Eva and Mara already introduced, and I will go a little bit more into detail in 1 second. Next slide, please. First, two forms of compliance markets are cap and trade system, which is the example of the EU. What happens is that an authority sets a limit on the total emissions that can be emitted at a given time. And then, for instance, in the case of the EU ETS, the EU provides allowances to companies in one sector, and they reduce the amount of allowances year by year until reaching net zero. And the way it happens is that these allowances are auctioned, and they can be traded either directly among companies or with a regulator. So this creates an incentive to reduce emissions, a monetary incentive. Another more direct way of pricing emissions is through carbon taxes. Essentially, if you emit something, you pay. This is a much easier to implement measure than cap and trade systems. For instance, at the level of cities, it can be more easy to implement a carbon tax. However, the EU ETS already covers most of the cities in the EU. One advantage that both have is that they can help mitigate emissions in a cost-effective way. The cap and trade system will give you the certainty that you will reduce emissions, but it will be uncertain in terms of how much it will cost, because it will be a market mechanism of auctioning. The carbon taxes, on the other hand, is the opposite. You have certainty about the price, but you don't know for sure how successful it will be in reducing emissions. Both can have a disadvantage of reducing the competitiveness of a city. In the long term, they will make sense, but in the short term, they may have a negative economic cost for consumers, for citizens, or for the industry as well. Next slide, please. And here, this is a very nice illustration on the potential role of voluntary carbon markets for removals, which was already introduced. For instance, for the case of emission reductions, we have already established that the EU ETS is the main tool in the EU, and for cities, it already incentivizes emission reductions. But the case for emission removals is very different. The problem is that even though we know that we will need emission removals in the future, cities will need emission removals. Essentially, every organization that has a net zero target will need emission removals at some point. The problem is that there are not incentives to adopt them at the moment. In the scale at which we will need them, we really need to start sooner than later. They will be implemented within compliance markets in the EU, but in the short term, voluntary markets can help the adoption gap that may be needed. And this could be an opportunity, for instance, for cities to tap on some private investment and have, for instance, agreements on public-private partnerships, of course, mindful of the claims that can be made in that case. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. Some final comments. Again, reducing emissions is the main priority for cities. This is already incentivized in compliance markets. Voluntary carbon markets can help raise the level of ambition, particularly for the case of emission removal. Carbon markets in general can be very powerful in both cases. Nevertheless, they are not the only tool at the disposal of cities. Things as procurement, for instance, can be very powerful, especially for the case of removal. For the voluntary carbon market, it can provide an incentive to leverage private funding. But in all cases, or voluntary or compliance markets, it has to be clear that always when implementing projects, there is always much more than carbon at question. Cities have priorities such as the well-being of citizens. So in all cases, it is worth exploring synergies between social, economic, and broader environmental goals. And finally, for compliance markets, again, this is the main tool for reducing emissions in the EU. And very concrete things that cities can be doing, as Mara already explained, is creating awareness of the things that are coming in the future, building capacity, and also making sure that the regulations support the adoption and efficient implementation of technologies that will be key to mitigate climate change in the coming years. This is it from my side, and I'll be happy to take questions in the end.
Great, thank you, Oscar. Heading over to Emeric directly.
Yeah, thanks, Ma. So I'll just say a quick word about the City Finance Lab, which was a climate kick supported initiative that lasted 4 years between 2017 and 2021. A bit of a predecessor the net zero cities, focusing only on finance and developing innovative finance solutions that catalyze climate action in cities. So how did we do this? We did basically call for proposals, inviting cities or organizations working with cities to submit their innovative climate solutions. We selected technical advisors that could support in developing that solution, and then tried to scale and replicate their implementation across different cities in Europe. And within that City Finance Lab, in total, we supported around 12 initiatives, and 3 of those had some link to the carbon markets. So that those are the ones that we'll focus on today. Next slide. Yeah, so the very first project is the Bologna carbon market. It was actually the pilot project that we supported with the City Finance Lab. And it was meant to be a refinancing mechanism for the city. So basically using the revenues from the sale of carbon credits from past projects to invest into new projects for the city. So basically a type of revolving fund that they could use to accelerate their low carbon transition. So this the main challenges they had was one that we mentioned already in this webinar. So the double counting of emissions between the buyers of the credit and the local government. The framework upon which to, or with which to certify the credit. That was one key aspect, because they had quite high transaction costs linked to the framework. And there was a local issue when it came to transferring revenue directly from urban project from the credit revenue to the municipality to specific projects. So generally the revenue would be included in the annual budget of the city and could not be, let's say, earmarked for specific activities. So we supported them for 6 months, looking at the different options when it came to double counting. It was not fully addressed because basically at the time the government did not have specific emission reduction objectives or any obligation to reduce its emissions. So with the idea that the city would not claim the emission reductions, only use the marketing opportunity when it comes to developing these projects, then they would avoid the double counting issue. And when it came to the revenue distribution, let's say the result of the technical advisory was that a local nonprofit would be used as an intermediary, where basically the revolving fund concept would be hosted. And the projects would, through this fund, they could reinvest into new projects, basically. Unfortunately, the Bologna carbon market was never implemented. We have not been able to find out right now what is its current status, but the team changed within the city, and the project itself was set aside. And the second project I wanted to mention was from Ever Impact. So they are a provider of solutions, specifically environmental monitoring software that helps cities to monitor, reduce, and monetize their air pollution data. And their idea was to use these software solutions also to generate credits and to also help a bit to identify what is the specific emission reductions that are linked to each project. So their challenges were, one, on how to assign specific reductions to specific climate projects, and 2, again, this issue of double counting. So beyond the double counting issue in France, there was a requirement at the time in 2021 that each city get national government authorization to claim or monetize emission reductions. So which limited a bit the scaling opportunity of that solution for Ever Impact and to offer it to other cities. One option to turn the problem around for cities when it comes to claims is to say, rather than having the city pre-finance the project and a company then pay for the final pay for the emission reduction, switch it around, and to have infrastructure investors come up with the upfront financing and then selling the certificates to the city. And in that case, those doing the initial investment would not be able to account for the emission reductions. In the end, this does not solve the solution of, let's say, reducing the burden of the investment for the cities, because they did have to pay for the emission reductions, but it was one way that was explored. But Ever Impact decided to move a bit away from the city's options, and to offer in the services that were directly implementable for industries, and also with a less of a broad range than what they initially expected at the city level, which made also the monitoring of GHG emissions simpler. And the third project, actually, which was, I would say, the most exciting, because also more of a success, is the one that Anne will present, so the Coopérative Carbone in La Rochelle. And I will pass the word on to her to present to you.
Thank you, Henrik, and hello, everybody. So I will present you our initiative in La Rochelle. You can take the first slide, please. Where do come from the project? Firstly, in the city of La Rochelle, in the west of France, we had a project who aims to get the net zero to 2040. That means lots of actions to be done to make a big reduction of emission, around 75%, and that means also to develop carbon sink, about the 25% that we don't know how to make them reduce. So to do this project, this general project for the whole city, and with private and public partnerships, we had this help from the state, from the plan d'investissement, with a lot of investment from public and private partnership, in order to invest in buildings, in mobilities, in infrastructure, in all the subject that we had to do about the reduction of emission, and in order to make a collective goal. But when we have put in place this project, you can pass the slide, please. We also had few questions, because having this objective to get the net zero is really hard to do at the scale of a city. But also we had no answer about how to help the reality of the project. So we didn't know how we could include in this partnership not only big projects, but a lot of small ones, because we have a lot of small initiatives, and we had to include them if we want to have the ambitious. The second question was how we could access to real environmental impacts of those projects, and in the long term also. So we needed to have a common carbon engineering. We needed to count in the same way all the projects, and to have to be in order to form and to teach all people in the city to use the same methodology. And the last one that explain why we have done local carbon credit market is how we could make funds with all the reduction emission and carbon sink that we could make in place in the area. And of course, we needed to have the money to make in order to let them done. So you can pass then the next one, please. What we have done is creating a cooperative society. That means it's a social society, special kind of society that can bring together, of course, the institution, all the public parts of our city, but also companies of the territory, big and small ones, all of them. Because, of course, public policies, public local policies are really very important, and we have to be in coherence when we want to develop carbon project with them. But we also need the business part to get involved, because all the private actor can also adapt a lot of things, can work with a client, with the consumers, can work with all the stakeholders, and so they have a big part and a big action to be in cooperative. We have also included all the citizens, because they can also take part in all the action we want to take in place. And so in this cooperative carbon, we have created a tool, a special tool for cooperation around the action, the climate action. And we have shared this governance. That means that all the stakeholders of this social society can decide, propose, finance, or be active in all different kind of projects we want to support. We can go to the next one. So that means that we need to help all the community in the net zero way. That means that first we have to help that to understand and to measure. That means that we have to put the carbon engineering in place in order that they have the capacity to have their own evaluation, to have the carbon footprint, and to know how to reduce their footprint. That's really, really important, because as I told at the first beginning, we need to have a huge, big plan to make a reduction of our territory. So it's obvious that we have to help everyone to make a reduction plan to be done. So that's why in the cooperative carbon, we are doing some measurement and some reduction plan, in order to be sure that all the stakeholders and moreover the private companies who can be able to finance carbon sink can also before have reducing their own emission. So we do this first mission, the third 3 points. And the fourth one is the contribution. That means that we are doing the instruction of carbon projects in order to make them labelization, to certify them, and we are helping them to be support to be evaluated and to be really supported in order to make them done to the end, from the beginning to the end. We are helping this kind of projects. Once the projects are helped to be created, we are making the certification of the credit carbon, and then we are looking for the contributors to help to finance this project. For a few examples, we are implemented projects that all projects which have a methodology which can help them to be recognized. For example, forestry project, and also agricultural projects. And all we are focused mostly on projects on the nature-based solution, because we know that our environment can have a lot of solutions that we can develop first before thinking about technology think. So we are only develop this nature-based solution. And we have also not only the carbon point of view to select this project, because we know that we need this carbon sink for the carbon point of view, but that's not enough. We need also, for example, for our agricultural to preserve and to regenerate ecosystem. It's more, it's bigger than only the carbon thing. We have to be sure that we are doing some revitalization soil projects, and to be sure that our agricultural ecosystem will be able to feed us in the next years. So we are really looking about what is bringing this project more than the carbon point of view. And by leading this project all together from the point of view of the territory, we also bring an economic and a social value on our territory, because people are now able to make them be done, that creating an economic activity, of course, in order to help them to be done. So that's really important, to be able to have this mixity of the different kind of projects in our territory, and to be able to make all the stakeholders learn about how to learn and to be able to make a project to be done. We can go to the third one. Donc, for example, a project that we have done, because we can also do very small projects. So as you see, we have a few hundred credit carbon who have to be selected, because on our city, we have a very lack a big lack of plantation. So we are weak in plantations, and that's why we need to have a big action in all the different places which are possible to be able to develop the trees patrimony. And we also need them as an adaptation plan, because trees can locally make the temperature go lower in a hot weather. And so that's also important to help the territory to be more resilient to all the climatic events that we had we know. And that also help us in order to have a water cycle and biodiversity. And that's why we are really focused on all this, the life cycle assessment of our project. You can see at on the picture that for the protection of the trees, we are using it's not plastic bags, it's ostreoculture bags that we had used from the sea, because we have ostreoculture, and so we are sure that we are not making more bad improvement of our environmental. We are avoiding all bad point that can be avoided. And we also make appropriation by the population. So we are sure that we can make volunteers come, and in order that the population is learning about also the projects, and that we that can also after make new ones in all the cities around La Rochelle. And you can go further, and I will finish by just a picture of a few other projects that we have done, thanks to all the companies and institutions who helped that to be financed, because they paid for that, and that all the population of all these small cities around La Rochelle will now take care of all those trees.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you to all our presenters for the great presentation. And before we dive into the questions, we have some few time to take some question on. Please let me state that we will of course share the presentation after the webinar, and are also currently preparing a 2-pager on carbon markets, which we will share with all participants. And if you have questions on how to monetize carbon markets for your net zero cities projects, or especially in the case of carbon removal, but also some inspirations that you may have took from the examples presented by Anne and by Emmerich and Oscar, please do not hesitate to state this to your city advisor, who will then lead you to the city's Mission Capital Hub, and we can have a case by case analysis of the different cases and give you specific advice on how to, like, whether these projects are suited for the carbon market, and think around how this could be possible. But then let's start with the questions. We already compiled some that you post in the chat. Feel free to add more. But first, I would like to send one question in the direction of Oscar. It is posed by Philipp Können from Leuven. and he says that the message is clear with regard to carbon crediting being lengthy and costly. But is it possible to give a cost range? Is it like 10K of euros or 100K of euros per project? Oscar, do you have an answer for us?
I don't know. This was not my part exactly, but from my perspective, at a large scale for large projects, the development of the credits is a small fraction of the total cost of the mitigation output. At least for the case of removals, which are very expensive. But yeah, I don't know about the experience that others may have for emission reductions or avoidance.
Thank you, Oscar. I think important here to underline is that it really depends on a case-by-case basis. And here, of course, I mean, carbon crediting is one part of the medal, but it's of course also the development of like the whole project, which has to be aligned with the verification methodology. Then, of course, the verification who has a specific cost, etc. pp. So it's really something I think you cannot answer on this partial as basis, but really on a case-by-case basis. But I think Emmerich has a complement there too.
Yeah, it was just to give maybe two examples. I think so forest conservation projects that are quite large scale and which span on quite large surface. There they can range, I would say they can get to around 200,000 euros for a monitoring sort of reporting verification on a 10-year lifetime. Or sorry, per year on 10-year lifetime. So because you need to go and measure how the trees have grown, you need to take there's quite a lot of manual labor involved in it. But recently working also more on BECCS types projects, so bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, where data is much easier to collect. Let's say the evaluation of how much ton of CO2 is actually removed is easier to measure. There we're talking closer to tens of thousands of euros per year. So that gives you also a bit of a range, and of course different technologies and different size of projects will vary along that scale as well.
Thank you, Emmerich. Yeah, as said, happy to take that up also bilaterally, where we can give much more specific information on a per project basis. Then here is another question. If you have EU ETS industries in our city, can we benefit from their taxes directly and develop carbon projects thanks to them? I think this is a question for you, Oscar, but also happy if Eva wants to answer this.
Yeah, and I think this is the question that I already answered. It was how cities can benefit from EU ETS, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so essentially the EU ETS, they share directly most of the revenues with the states. Now, how this split happens within the state is something that I don't know, but indirectly, cities can get access to this funding through the connection with the states, of course, but also through programs that are financed from the revenues of the ETS, which are, for instance, the Innovation Fund and also the Modernization Fund. And this indeed is a big challenge, particularly for small cities that don't know how to benefit from this. For instance, the revenue sharing from the states can be more straightforward, but benefiting from these other two programs is not that clear in many cases. So it is very important for cities to have this capacity in-house, so they know how they can get the best out of the benefits from ETS.
Thank you, Oscar. Very great. Then we have another question from Mr. Können from Leuven, directly to Anne. If it would be possible to share some numbers on the project of La Rochelle, like costs of setting up the system, amount of revenue gained, yeah, you can either do this here or like you can also share further information afterwards. But if you have some numbers, certainly helpful.
Yes, I can add some numbers. For example, now we have 80 stakeholders, part of the cooperative carbon. We have helped to be done 60 projects, but in the project we have individual ones and collective ones. That means that it's not only just one project and 1 hectare of plantation, for example. We have 80 agriculture farmers, 80 farmers who are involved, for example. And in all these projects, that means that it's around 50,000 credit carbon who have been done and sold. That's around between 1.5 and 2 million euro helped to finance this project.
Thank you very much, Anne. And then I think that will be the last question. And please, if you come up with more questions also after the webinar, don't hesitate to write an email. But we also received the question that last week during Net Zero City Spring School in Stockholm, it was mentioned that carbon credits concern projects outside city boundary. You do not mention that. Is it correct? Here, I would say one cannot do this total split, absolutely, because of course, project outside of city boundaries, that would render the case a bit different for reduction and avoidance credit because you don't claim them to your 80% reductions. But for other project type that can also be in the city, like for example, a removal project. So I would not say there is a clear cut of like city boundary or not. Again, it depends on a case-by-case basis. Good. I think with that, we answered most of the questions in the chat. And as said, otherwise, please feel free to send us an email. We will send out the presentation afterwards and later on the 2-pager. And thank you very much for your attention. It was great to see you all in this webinar. And thank you again to our presenters for their great presentation. Thank you. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.